Action. Welcome to the Rumikay Talks podcast. And today we have a guest, Jeffrey Marcus. Welcome, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Konstantin.
How's the weather treating you today?
Well, we live in Los Angeles, so it's always bright and sunny and hot.
It's like 95 degrees Fahrenheit where I am right now.
Oh, you're in the valley. Yeah. It's a warm 86 over here.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I wish I have that. So let's just dive in. Let's talk about young Jeffrey. Can you describe a moment in your life when you took your first action towards your creative career?
Yes, I can. I was not happy in my hometown of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I needed to get out of both my house of origin and my high school. And so I decided to leave high school early in order to go to what I'd hope would be a genre university. So I went to a place called Exeter, which was a summer program, and I got my gym credit and English credit, which were all I needed in my senior year, and proceeded to apply to Carnegie Mellon. I was a bit young to go to Carnegie Mellon University, which is a really good drama school because I was the age of most juniors, but they said I could take a year of liberal arts, then re-audition, which I did, and so I got in for what would have been my freshman year. But my high school, my hometown, didn't really have any theater program. So I don't know why I felt really called to it, as I had never really done it, but I did.
Wonderful. What is, do you have like maybe a moment in your life when you saw a movie or saw a certain actor performed something that really inspired you on your acting journey?
It's very embarrassing. But I used to love watching The Partridge Family and The Brady Bunch, and I would go up into my room and reenact them in privacy. My father was a gym teacher and very like a bully. And so, as a kid, when I saw Sound of Music and I wanted to sing the cast album and dance around the living room to that, I got in a lot of trouble. So I learned to hide my artistic endeavors and keep them to myself.
Yeah, I can't imagine having this passion inside of you and then having this necessity to hide it inside.
Yeah.
What was the first time when you acted with someone?
I went to a place called a yeshiva, which is like half English, half Hebrew day school in Harrisburg. And 1 year, instead of doing a book report, I asked if I could do a play. And there was a girl I had a crush on named Hera Hartman. And so I think I wrote a play about the assassination of John F. Kennedy, making myself John F. Kennedy, of course, and making her Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. And I think that was the first time I ever did a play. So that was the first time. I remember being torn really about, coming from a Jewish family. I was expected I would be a doctor, and I was fascinated by behavior and psychology. So I was torn between being a psychologist and, of course, dreaming of being an actor. And then I read a play called Equus, which was equal parts a play and a psychological study of a human being. And I thought, wow, this has everything I always wanted in it. And I thought it's something I'd love to do one day. And early in my career, there were a couple times where a director would want me to be unclothed, and it would be for like a TV movie. And I'd say, well, I don't really understand why I have to be unclothed, because you're not going to be able to show anything. And the only thing I know of where it's necessary for the actor to be naked would be Equus, thinking I would never get to do it. And of course, I finally got to do it in regional theater as a young actor and had to put my money where my mouth was, so to speak, and be naked on stage, which was not an enjoyable experience for me. There's constantly shows on Broadway, off Broadway, and around Los Angeles that have nudity in it. And I think, I have a couple of friends who are intimacy coordinators, and I think as long as there is no touching of said genitalia, I think it's okay. One can do it.
Sounds doable then. If it's safe, as long as it's safe, the art is art, but there's a lot of dangerous things happening too. So I noticed that people who were starting out like a few decades back then, they were starting with writing plays and then either acting in them or producing them. And right now I feel like people more doing like short films and mini series on YouTube to kind of like start off their creativity by themselves. Why do you think that is? Is it because of the technology advancement, or is just back then theater was much more popular than TV?
Yes, I think it depends where you are. I think in New York, there are still people who are developing theater because it is such a theater town. We're about to embark on the Edinburgh Festival, where people from around the world are bringing, new forms of theater. Fleabag, which was a huge hit series, started as a one-woman show, and then she took it to the Edinburgh Festival, and then the West End, and then it became a series. There's something right now in New York called Oh Mary. The same thing happened. I think that what you're speaking to is in LA, which quintessentially isn't really a theater town. More people, because you can make a whole movie on your iPhone these days. Yeah. More people are doing that. It's cheaper than renting a theater. I mean, even to rent a theater in Los Angeles is very expensive. So given that we all have a film and editing components in our pocket, we see more of that, which is both wonderful and tragic, because anybody who has a phone thinks they can make a movie. And of course, as we see so often, you really can't.
Yeah, there are content creators and there are filmmakers.
Oh, right. And then you have the whole YouTube and TikTok thing where, recently I just had another content creator come to me and was like, I'm going to be the one. I'm going to really work on my acting. I'm going to be the first student of yours that's a content creator that's going to become an actor. Well, cut to they're now moving back to Texas in about 2 weeks. I find that content creators, while they love making content, they don't necessarily have the technique nor the know-how nor the discipline to want to be an actor. They don't like learning lines. They don't like rehearsing and getting better. They don't like having to really kind of create the architecture for a performance. So, I mean, I've worked with so many content creators, a lot of whom are making 7-8 figures a year. So they're doing very well. But once they're making that kind of money, they don't want to come and work for minimum wage or scale to do a low budget movie or television. The one exception is I worked with Kim Kardashian, and she has really turned her discipline for social media into, of course, she's now starring in multiple series. So there is one exception to the rule.
Well, now I have a question. How did you get to work with Kim Kardashian, and in what capacity?
This was quite a while ago. I was working with Kelly Osbourne, who was doing some independent film and who's actually a very talented actress. And I've actually even coached her mother. And I think that Kim called Kelly and said, I saw your work. It was really good. Who you use? And she referred me. And so at that time, Keeping Up with the Kardashians was just beginning, and people were writing small roles in movies of her playing herself, which you've taken a class. You know that being able to play yourself isn't as easy as it sounds. So she came in and coached a couple of times for these movies, and it did quite well. She was a hard worker. I remember, my fondest memory is, I remember she would show up with these wads of bills wrapped in rubber bands. That would say, how do you carry so much cash around? And she'd say, I just got back from Vegas, and they would pay me X amount of money in cash to show up at a party at some club and, let people take pictures. I mean, thousands and thousands of dollars in cash.
Wow. Did she have like a bodyguard with her?
No, this was way before that.
Nice. Well, we touched on something earlier about casting and about acting in LA. So since the pandemic, everything has changed in terms of casting. A lot of people started to cast online and submitting tapes online and almost recording the whole episode for someone online. Like, you need to have a good light, you need to have this and that. What do you think about that?
I'm of mixed minds. On the one hand, it's fantastic because you don't have to drive across town in the heat and sit in a casting director's office for upwards of an hour in order to get a few moments of them where you get to do it one time and you're told thank you and you leave. And yet at the same time, you would get FaceTime with the casting director who would perhaps give you some notes. You would get a sense in the room of how you did. You would be able to perhaps take notes and try a different read on it. And some people are really good in a room and have just such charisma that they really wow the casting director. On the other hand, you can now do it in your own home. You can do as many takes as you like until you feel like you get it just right. But the amount of effort that goes into getting dressed and looking appropriate, which you still have to do in person, but then lighting yourself and filming yourself and getting a reader and not knowing in any way, shape, or form what they would like for you to bring to the character. It's like anything. It has its pros and cons. You know, it is like shouting into the night, meaning that you spend hours and hours in preparation and getting this ready, and then you send it out there and crickets. You never, unless you book it, you just don't hear anything. And so that can be very frustrating because it's a lot of work for, unless you book it, very little feedback. It's a very transitioning time right now. I know that the casting directors aren't being given the money to rent office space because the studios want to keep their prices down. So it's easier for them to just accept tapes. So the tapes can now come from not just LA and New York, but from around the world. So they're sifting through thousands and thousands of tapes. It's an interesting time. I'm very intrigued to see how this business ends up once the dust settles.
What do you think about, especially for an actor who's starting out, what do you think on the importance of having an agent who helps you to do those, submit those auditions, prepare for them? Do you think it's essential to have an agent when you're starting out as an actor in LA specifically?
I don't think it's essential. I think it's really helpful. I'm not sure how you find out about auditions or how you get your tapes seen for auditions without an agent submitting them or a manager submitting them. That said, it is being done, and oftentimes it takes on a different kind of ambition. You know, it takes finding ways into the casting director. And, you know, oftentimes if you have friends who know friends who have friends, you can find a way. And that can be very helpful. As you mentioned, I just did The Color Purple, and the way I was able to book that was because one of my dearest friends was producing it, and he said, there is this role. I said, I'd be happy to put myself on tape if you make sure the director sees it. And he indeed gave it to the director, and I was able, without an agent, to book that. I was just listening to Pedro Pascal talk about how he got Game of Thrones, and he was able to do that by knowing Sarah Paulson, who is best friends with one of the creators' wives. And so there are ways around to do it. The sad thing is I find that so many of these people are doing these casting workshops. And I have a lot of friends who are in casting, and they do these casting workshops, and it's a wonderful way for them to supplement their income because casting directors, too, are having a hard time paying their bills. The problem is I see actors spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars every year, and the number of times those pay off, unfortunately, are negligible. And of course, casting directors are really good at casting directors. They're incredibly intuitive. They have almost a sixth sense as to what works or not, but they're not really well versed, most of them, in technique or how to get an actor there. And so for all these actors that think that they're training by going to these casting director workshops, I think they're spinning the wheels and wasting an awful lot of money that could be better spent in either making their own projects or going to an acting class where they really are getting more skills and becoming better actors.
So what do you think the Pareto principle here? So 20% of work brings 80% of result. For example, an actor who's committed to acting wants to get cast on a show on a TV. he can spend money on a lot of things right now to improve his acting. What would be those 20% that he should spend his money on to help his career progress?
I like to phrase it differently. I like to phrase it that spirit meets you at the point of action. Anytime you take action, universe kind of moves in and assists you. Sitting around visualizing things happening, while somewhat valuable, aren't the same as actually taking action. There's a lot of things that we can do right now that don't involve even spending a lot of money. I think that being well-versed in movies, because so many directors now are coming from film school backgrounds where their only technique in working with actors is referencing a performance in another movie. So if someone's referencing a performance in Citizen Kane and you've never seen Citizen Kane, then they're not going to be able to assist you. So I would say make sure you have a great knowledge of movies and streaming and television so that when people reference performances, you can jump on it. Plus, you just learn so much from watching really good actors. Or you learn a lot what not to do from watching mediocre actors. I also think going to the theater is the actor's medium. So that's a great way for actors to learn to act, because when you're watching a film, so much of it is editing and sound and direction. So that's one thing. I think reading books, especially fiction books, simply because it trains your imagination to enter into different times and different worlds and different ways of thinking. I remember there's so many pictures of people like James Dean and Marilyn Monroe carrying around Dostoevsky because he was so brilliant at unpacking how human thought works, especially amongst the mind of murderers and such. So to be able to really expand your consciousness that way, I think nature teaches us so much about acting because there's always grace and form and balance and unity. So there's that. If you want to spend your money wisely, I would say, first off, make sure you have really good headshots. That's a good place to spend it. Don't just have your friend take a picture in an alleyway. It's good to have a picture because they need to pop. I would say get yourself in a good technique class. Acting technique is very different than improv. People can be great improvers, but when they get text, they don't know how to take that off the page and make it come alive. An improv class is great to teach you to trust your instincts and be spontaneous and in the moment and keep it live and listen and respond. So there's a place for those. But a true technique class, and whether it's Meisner or sensory or what I do, which is a scene study class, those things are irreplaceable. And I think that's why so many acting jobs are going to actors from Australia and from England and Canada, because there is a history of training there. People know that to be good at anything, you have to be equipped in it. You have to study it. You have to practice it. In America, we have this instant stardom where people feel that if they have a great look and they can talk convincingly, that they have the opportunity to be a great actor, and that's rarely the case. I have a lot of students who I see go out and talk about how they don't believe in training and they're just very natural, and I know they've studied with me for years and years. It hurts my feelings, but I get it. They want people to just think they're these born talents, which we have every now and again, but not them.
So I noticed that you combine the spiritual psychology and different acting techniques in your teaching process. What is your favorite acting technique that you apply to your auditions and your casting tapes that you record and in your performances as well?
I think acting technique is like having a good tool belt. There are times you need a hammer. There are times you need a wrench. There are times you need a screwdriver. So it would be like saying, what is your favorite tool? I don't really know that that's effective for all things, because techniques for comedy can be very different than techniques for drama. There's techniques that are needed for being able to recount events that happened off camera. There are techniques demanded for when you have a huge emotional response needed. So I think it's really good to get a good smattering of all kinds of techniques, which is kind of my way of teaching. I offer Meisner exercises if someone needs them, and I'm seeing that they're not really listening correctly. I offer sensory techniques when I feel that people aren't really endowing props with something that has import, or they're not being able to really go into memories in a way that I believe that they're really talking about something that happened to them. And then, of course, it's breaking down a script into doable, playable actions. So many people go into acting thinking, well, I'm very sensitive and I can feel a lot, which helps. But we're not called feelers, we're called actors. And oftentimes people will put the feeling ahead of what it is they're doing, as opposed to letting the doing be what leads the feeling. So the feeling comes as a response to their intentions either being met or not being met. I wish I could give you a more clear, pat answer as to what is my favorite, but I think probably working with doings or actions are where I'm really adept. I had a wonderful teacher when I first came to New York. Her name was Mira Rostova. She taught Montgomery Clift and Geraldine Page and Jessica Lange and Bob Fosse. And she came from the German school as opposed to the Russian school of Stanislavski. She came from the German school of Max Reinhardt. And her technique was very much based on taking apart the text and finding out what you're doing at every moment. Then, of course, all that work gets thrown out when you're actually in it because you're hopefully just taking the journey. But by knowing what you're doing in every moment, it's like if I were to go to Burbank to see you, I would know that I need to go to Pico and then make a left onto Highland and then on Highland get on the freeway. So I have a direction of where I'm going. Now, certain streets might be closed or there might be a dog running across the street or, I might need to stop and get gas. So anything can happen on that journey, but I at least know the direction that I'm going in. So I'm not just up there being lost and indulging in feelings.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Does it make sense? I hope so.
Yeah. Let's pause and talk a little bit about directing. Okay. Since you mentioned directions. I'm curious about your take on it. So there is this, let's say, two contrasting examples. One, an actor that likes to, very simple direction, smother her with love, or make her scared.
Okay, so I would turn those into doable, playable actions. We know how to smother. Mm-hmm. We know how to flatter. We know how to seduce. We know how to provoke. We know how to entice. So I would say all those are doable, playable actions. And the way that I entice is going to be different than the way you entice, which is going to be different than the way your girlfriend might entice. So in other words, we're not figuring out how we're doing it because that's none of our business. And that's where actors get lost in being a puppet, like doing it the same way again and again. But, for me to seduce, it's going to depend if you're looking at me. It's going to depend if I feel there's a mutual attraction. It's going to depend if I feel that you're interested in somebody else. So to seduce has a certain action to it, But also in the middle of a seduction scene, we might make a joke because, people like humor. We might also pull back because we feel we're going too far. But notice everything I've just said. To humor, to pull back. These are all active verbs. We want to come from a place of action. And most people just pick verbs like, oh, I want to tell them this, or I want them to know this, which are not actions. They're not doable, playable actions. It just means saying the words that are written. So telling someone, letting someone know, those are intellectual actions which tend to be boring as hell. Recently we had a movie called Oppenheimer, and Robert Downey Jr. had a lot of exposition. But if you watch him, what's so brilliant about his performance is he's never just telling the story or explaining something. He's always, commanding, to command, or to protest, or to defend, or to remind. He's just so alive in that performance, a performance that really is purely expositional. So much storytelling. But I'm going to get back to what you said about directing, just because I have a lot of directors who come and take my class to learn how to work with actors better. And, depending on where you've studied directing, sometimes you get acting classes. Most of the time you don't. And they kind of, what was it Alfred Hitchcock said? Actors are like children, just, make them feel good about what they're doing. I think there's a reason a lot of his performers did not win Academy Awards, because it's more about his movie making and less about performance. The directors I tend to love the most, whether it's, a Robert Redford or Martin Scorsese, Elia Kazan, they all had acting in their backgrounds. So they understand how to work with actors. So I wish more directors took the time to understand how to get the performances from their actors, the kinds of notes that are helpful for actors and the kind of notes that aren't. I want you to cry here is not helpful for an actor.
Do you think it really depends on the actor? Because some actors can get pissed when you give them very simple directions.
I think that any actor who studied acting and knows how to act would appreciate a director who gives them an action, because we love to take action. I think the problem is that actors feel like they're oftentimes being given a result or a line reading or being told how to do it. And that's not helpful at all. That gives expectations, that gives results. And we as actors don't work in results, we work in process. So I think it's teaching directors how to speak our language. A really skilled actor, and I try and teach my actors this, will know how to translate a bad direction into a doable, playable. Like, of course, the most famous one is a director saying, okay, just pick up the pace. I need this to be faster.
75% faster.
Yeah. But what that makes an actor do is just rush through it and not have any of the moments. So, to tell an actor, okay, it is 3:00, you have to be somewhere at 3:07. There's an urgency. You need to get through this so that you can make your 3:07 appointment. Well, then the actor has a reason that they have to get through this much quicker, so they're not having to think about just speaking faster.
What do you think about directors showing you what to act, like acting it for you?
I think it's a sign of a really unskilled director.
Your reaction was enough.
Yeah. There's some actors who don't mind, and so I can't speak for all actors, but I can say it's insulting. One of my first movies was a movie called Endless Love. Now, I had been through Carnegie Mellon training. I was studying in New York. It was with Franco Zeffirelli, arguably one of the greatest directors. And I hope this guy isn't listening, but the lead actor was a guy named Martin Hewitt, who was gorgeous beyond belief, but had never acted before. I think Zeffirelli found him parking cars in Chicago. And Zeffirelli would do everything, including say these words, count to 3, say this, fall on your knees, look up to the gods and shout. And he would rehearse him doing it exactly like Zeffirelli did it, again and again, until he did it exactly like Zeffirelli did it, and then he'd film that. Now, he got a good performance out of Martin Hewitt, but you'd be hard-pressed to tell me another movie that Martin Hewitt did after that, because he didn't have the skill set. He was able to mimic what Zeffirelli wanted. I would think most actors would want to have longevity and want to be able to work with multitudes of directors and multitudes of styles and be able to fulfill a director's vision based on their talent. When a director, as you know, you are a director, you don't always have the time to spend so much time with the actors because you're worried about sets and lighting and camera and hopefully you can hire an actor who can do their job.
Longevity. Let's talk about longevity a little bit. How do you keep your saw sharpened, so to speak, as an actor?
It's a really great and interesting question. I was just watching, someone sent me a clip of a movie that I did in the 80s. And as I was watching it, it wasn't just that my work felt a little bit clunky, but everyone's did. And I realized, boy, the styles of acting have changed so much in these last 40 years. And I think longevity is by having your finger on the pulse of what is present. I'm constantly watching whatever's coming out, both on television and in film, so that I can best help my actors, because the style of acting now is a very specific, it's almost a documentary. I mean, nobody wants to see someone acting. It wants to be as real as newsreels. Whereas if you watch movies from the 40s, as brilliant as they might be, there was a heightened reality to them. I mean, there was almost a joy in performing. Now, you have visionary actors and actresses like a Meryl Streep, who, no matter what decade you're watching her work from, it's as fresh and as real and as complicated and as almost larger than life as can be. You just sense her joy of acting, even when she's suffering. And you can watch actors like James Dean, who are working in the 50s, and yet their work feels as fresh as tomorrow. So I think it's very important to have your pulse on what is acting now. And then notice, like, Yorgos, I'm not going to be able to say his last name, has an incredibly specific style that you see in Poor Things. And his work is almost a little theatrical. Scorsese has a very specific style in his work. If you watch Shogun, it's a specific style. If you watch the other two, so it's being aware of that acting has many different styles. And comedy The Bear is considered a comedy. And it is, you see why it's a comedy, but it's not a comedy like the Mary Tyler Moore Show was a comedy. We don't talk a lot about style in the media around acting, but hopefully you're with a teacher who does deal with style, because Bridgerton is a style. Game of Thrones is a style. If you were acting Game of Thrones style on NCIS, it would be ridiculous.
Yeah. That's, I guess, the style that's like a directorial style, like a creative style. If you talk about specifically Yorgos Lanthimos or Game of Thrones. But there's also kind of like overall style. Like, for example, the movies from the 50s, acting is certain way, and from then the movies that are now. And my question is, what do you think affects? Is it like just the society in general, the technology, the writings, literature, or something else?
Well, again, even though you're saying style in the 50s, but if you watch Marlon Brando in the 50s, or you watch Audrey Hepburn and Marilyn Monroe in the 50s, they don't seem overwrought. But the 50s had an element of melodrama to them. We didn't have TV soaps yet. So, people were acting emotions. That was the style. Also, remember in the 50s, things were very inauthentic. The government we had then was, the perfect home, Ozzie and Harriet. So everyone was behaving in a way that wasn't authentic. Then the 60s came around and it was super authentic. Now we're in a time where people are calling news fake news, and people don't know what to believe as true or untrue. And the actor's job has always been to make the untrue true. So I think you'd be hard-pressed to find an actor working today that, I like Marty Short in Only Murders in the Building, but it's a true clown performance, in a way that Selena Gomez might not be doing, or even Steve Martin. But you have this one kind of comic performance amongst other actors grounding them. I think people want truth so badly because, you watch, I won't say which party, but you watch a convention that may have aired recently and you see people lying through their teeth. And I think people are desperate for truth. They don't know what to believe. And I think the more people go to the theater and go to movies and watch what truth actually looks like, to me, actors' job is to point society to where it's going. When you watch Killers of the Flower Moon, it's grabbing you by the guts because it seems so real. And indeed, it is based on real people.
What do you think about The Boys, the show?
Oh, darn. I don't watch it with regularity, but what I have seen is, it is in the style of superhero movies, right?
Yeah.
And that is a style. There's a grandness, an operaticness to that, which clearly is incredibly popular. And people are devoted to it, love it.
Yeah, but it's totally twisted. It's like,
yes.
Yeah.
As is the world we live in right now.
Yeah, I guess this is a perfect representation of the current state of affairs.
Now directors are so skilled that they create lookbooks. They work with their hair and makeup and wardrobe and set people to create a world, which The Boys certainly has created a world. And that you then, again, when you're not just doing things over Zoom, when you have an actor in the room and you can explain your vision, then the actors, if they're skilled, are able to leap into whatever reality you create for them. Because let's face it, you on this podcast, you have studied with me in the past. You as a student is very different than you as a podcaster. I'm sure it's very different than you as a director. So we're constantly putting on different hats. You're also a son. You're also a boyfriend or a lover. You're also... Oh, you're a husband now.
Yeah.
Oh, Constantine, congratulations. Mazel tov. So we put on many hats during the day and many styles. I mean, if we were throwing a surprise birthday party for you and you were, you would be in your superhero mode of everyone giving you their attention. I feel like we understand style innately. If you're at a Taylor Swift concert, that's one style of who you are. If you were at the Walt Disney Concert Hall listening to Shostakovich, even though you're still an audience member, it's a more restrained style. It saddens me that so many of the actors who move between styles, the Cate Blanchetts, the Daniel Day-Lewises, tend to be from other countries just because they do train in different styles of theater. And here it all seems to be very kind of kitchen sink reality.
Well, I've noticed a lot of British actors are really great in America. And particularly, they're very good with accents. They can do the Southern accent better than a person from LA or New York.
I think there's a couple things at play there. In England, you have from town to town different accents. So they're really good at hearing accents. Like, oh, he's from Birmingham, or he's from Liverpool, or he's Cockney. And there's such a social strata there that they're hyper attuned to languages. But also, they're workmen's there. You can be an actor in England and go from theater to theater to theater and have a nice middle-class life. So it's an aspirational thing. Here in America, it's either feast or famine. Are you going to be a movie star or a TV star or not work? So everyone's trying to grab that golden ticket and not realizing that training is important. There are acting classes in LA that poo-poo rehearsal. Why would we rehearse for a scene? We'll give you the scene the day of. Let's cold read and see what you can do. Because when you get an audition, that's all the time you get. Or you get the pages the day before you film. Well, it makes no sense to me whatsoever. That's like saying, oh, you want to play the violin? Well, we'll give you the music. You have to practice. Or being a football player. You're not just going to want to be a football player and jump into a game. You have to learn the basic rules and techniques of, running, catching, training. And in America, how many actors do you know that go, I don't need a class. I know what I'm doing. Acting is a craft that demands such skill and yet occasionally can be done without any.
Yeah, that's a good one. Let's talk about feature films versus TV shows. Okay. Which one do you think is better at the job as an actor, let's say? And what do you think is the future of both?
Oh, I wish I had a crystal ball. Well, I think they both present pros and cons. I mean, a feature is what we all dream of because it seems like features last forever and can have such great impact on a society and can become part of the zeitgeist. But then television nowadays, especially with streaming, has become very feature-like, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And so many of our film actors are doing streaming. The wonderful thing about doing a television series is that you tend to be able to live in one place. So if you have a family and children, it can be a 9 to 5 job, and the money is much better because hopefully you'll run X amount of seasons with every year getting big bumps in salary. So that has a really delicious draw to it. Features have such an intensity and such a overwhelming, all-encompassing, just walking into a whole nother world and creating new families and all of that. But again, between streaming and features, it's very hard to tell the difference anymore. Network television, as good as that used to be financially, is now really on its way out, unfortunately. I wish I knew where it was all going to end. And it feels like even features, the kind of movies I love. I just saw a movie called Problemista, which is already streaming, but it was fresh and new and interesting and, had such a vision. But Godzilla versus Kong is where it's at now, where it seems like the movies are more about the special effects and the CGI than the actual performances. I don't know where this goes. I do know people need to see their lives reflected, and I know that's important. And I don't think these tentpole movies are anything more than mythology, which can reflect our society to a degree, but it doesn't really psychologically reflect who we are as people.
What do you think? Do you watch more shows or films? If you just take your day, like your week, a regular week?
Given that I tend to go to the movies once a week, and I do, I also try and go to the theater once a week. But TV is every night, and TV, I am watching The Bear. I am watching Shogun. I am watching the other two. I am watching, I've usually got 6 or 7 shows going. I watch a lot more TV, but that said, everything I just mentioned, I don't think is network. I think those are all streaming and cable with budgets comparable to what a feature would be.
Well, I guess in terms of the future, what I think, everything is moving to TV.
You do.
But there are several things that can affect it. First, if this Apple Vision Pro start developing very fast and we start having movie theaters at our home, then feature films will go back again in popularity, I think. And people will be watching more of them because you have the whole experience. Or the TV shows and feature films will merge into something entirely new that has the quality of the feature films and kind of regularity of the TV show.
I think you're missing a really important ingredient, though, and that is the audience. I think there's something to be said about sitting in a dark room with hundreds of other people and going through things at the exact same time as them. And joining in laughter and laughing at someone who screamed 3 rows behind you because they got scared. I think there's something magical about the communal experience. And then in theater, of course, that's exponentially 100 times that, because not only are you going through it in the moment, but the actors are as well. So to me, theater is sacred and spiritual and as close as I get to being in the presence of God. But a movie is close to that, whereas most of us watch TV, maybe, well, since you're married, now you watch it with your wife, but for me, most of the time I'm watching with my dog. And for instance, comedies, I tend to not laugh out loud if it's just me. Whereas if I'm in a room full of people, I'll laugh out loud because I want to join into the laughter.
Well, I guess what I meant by Apple Vision Pro, like future version of it, is that how I see it. In the future, everyone's going to be either wearing or whatever the technological aspect of it, but it's going to be a communal experience. People from other countries going to be sitting with you in a room. You can even see them in a sense through the aspects of virtual reality and laugh with them at the same time. And that's why I think it might be the next level of the kind of like watching feature films. Because to be honest, I love feature films. I'm a filmmaker. I mean, I must love feature films, and I do love feature films, and I watch films from like the silent era to now. But I think I go to theaters less often than I was when I was like a kid, or like not a kid, like when I was in high school and stuff like that, because there's much more quality stuff is happening on TV than in theaters. And that troubles me. And that's the question I ask every guest, feature films versus TV shows, because I'm trying to understand or prepare or just contemplate about, what can be the future of it, and how can we prepare ourselves for that as filmmakers, as actors.
Did you see Oppenheimer in the theater?
Yeah.
Did you see it at home?
But okay. I haven't seen it at home.
I watched it both places, and there were pros and cons of both. At home, I could watch it with closed captioning because the dialogue was so fast, and I saw it in IMAX, so the sound wasn't good. So I was able to really get the dialogue at home, whereas I really enjoyed being part of a communal experience. Same with Barbie. Even though people can be annoying and be on their phones and chewing popcorn behind your ear, there's something about that. I mean, Barbie felt like truly a joyous experience for me in the theater.
It was a phenomenon. It's like when I was going in Burbank in theater, the entire plaza around it was pink.
Yeah.
Either pink or black, because it was a Barbenheimer, if you remember.
Yeah.
People in hats walking around and people in pink walking around. And
right.
Yeah.
I mean, but like was it The Hitman, which was recently?
On Netflix, yeah, there is a Hitman one.
Yeah. I mean, because that was so special effect laden, that was kind of fun to see in a theater. I'm going to see Twister, tomorrow night, because some of those things you just want to see. And I have in my theater, a big 10-foot screen. So it's like being in a small movie house, but I like going to the theater to see certain things. I want to see how people are reacting. See, that's another thing that actors who don't train in the theater miss, is being able to hear immediately what's funny about your performance. What's scary? How do you hold an audience without speaking? Those kind of things you learn in the theater. And those kind of things oftentimes actors are afraid to do on film or on television.
Yeah. Well, this particular topic I can discuss forever. I'd like to challenge your creativity a little bit. This is the question I ask my guests, and here it goes. If you were an extraterrestrial from a perfect world where everything is in balance, and now you're visiting our world with all of its issues, what would be the one thing that you'd fix?
Cruelty for no reason. Meanness. When I went to Africa, it was extraordinary to me that lions could be 3 feet away from us and not attack us. And I'd say, how do they know not to? He said, they've already been fed. They're full. They only kill when they're hungry, and they only eat as much as they need. What other species kills one another for no reason? In world wars, why are we killing each other? I don't understand. I just tuned into the Republican convention. Sorry if I lose half your listeners, but I didn't understand why they needed to demonize the other so much. It's such a weird polarity, duality, whereas most of the things that bother us about other people are things we've disowned or dislike about ourselves. And I just wish that instead of having to put that which we resent about ourselves onto other people, if my selfishness bothers me or my rage bothers me, I will put it onto someone else outside of me and hate them for it, as opposed to go, oh, well, their selfishness is really bothering me. Where am I being selfish right now? What is this reflecting in me that I've disowned? So I just wish people took more responsibility for themselves and worried less about what other people were doing. Except, and again, acts of cruelty. I don't think there's room for cruelty or hurting others for no reason. So that includes, racism, child abuse, crime, murder, theft. That's the one thing I don't get. And when you're out in nature, you don't experience that. In nature, everything cares for itself. I don't necessarily want to watch a lion kill a beautiful deer, but I realize for it to survive, it has to. It's not just killing the deer because it's cute or is a different religion.
the greed that human beings may experience may lead us to do those things. Because I don't think animals have greed, if you think about it.
No, I feed a couple feral cats outside my house. And sure, one of them will go, I'm eating here, and it like makes noises at the other one. But when it's done eating and it's left half of it for the other cat comes in. So it's not just eating it all so that you can't have it. And, unfortunately, in America, certainly with the billionaire class, which has more money than anyone and their offsprings could spend in 10 lifetimes, the fact that there's so many people starving and dealing with homelessness in this country, it's just so upsetting. But to me, that's another act of cruelty. But greed's a good word, too. I don't understand that.
That's what makes me sad, too, about the whole thing. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? Anything that I missed? Anything you'd like to promote? Could be anything.
Yeah. I would say, I want to encourage all of your listeners and viewers to vote. B, rescue animals. Our rescue places are overrun. And C, especially if you're actors, to go to the theater and watch live theater, because there's something about watching actors perform and create right directly in front of you that teaches you so much. And if they're not good, even that teaches you what not to do. I would say immerse yourself, even though you might just want to be in the DC universe or the Marvel universe. Make sure you have a great sense of the legacy of the giants of whose shoulders we stand upon. If you don't know Humphrey Bogart's work, or you don't know Lauren Bacall's work, or you don't know Veronica Lake's work, watch these brilliant artists, or Preston Sturges, or Howard Hawks. To really, if this is what you want to do with your life, if you wanted to be a writer, you would read all the greats. You would read Dickens and you would read Dostoevsky. So as an actor, I find it really lazy when I mention a movie or a TV show, and because it was possibly made before said actor was born, they have no knowledge of it. I think it's very important to know history, especially of the profession that you want to be a part of. And again, I encourage your director, listeners, to take an acting class. Take an improv class just to see how to best get what you want from the actors without upsetting them. And I encourage actors to take a directing class to see what a director is having to deal with in order, how we are just a cog in a wheel, especially in film and television. These are not the actor's medium, even though the actors get the most attention. And read. I think the more we can read and more we can understand the lives of others, the less room we have for judgment of the other. And travel, because America is not the center of the universe.
All right. And the final question of the episode I ask everyone who comes to my podcast, and this is Obsession of the Week. It could be anything. A book, a movie. For example, for me, this week is a book, Gentleman in Moscow.
Oh, I love that book.
But it doesn't have to be a book. It can be anything that you've been obsessed with this week.
I loved A Gentleman in Moscow. Have you seen the movie?
The show. I know the show on Hulu or Paramount Plus, but I don't want to watch it until I finish the book.
No, good idea, and it's surprisingly good. It's really wonderful. Hot yoga. I'm really enjoying hot yoga. It's really assisting me in being able to clear my skin and deal with the pickleball injury and get me out. But I want to pick a book as well, and I would say The Covenant of Water is a book, and I just finished it, and it was such a beautiful dip into a world that I had no idea about. India over 100-year period, tracing these families. It's an Oprah Book Club pick, but it's really just so beautiful. And they're going to make a movie of it. So if you're of Indian descent, all the more reason to read it because you can get an audition for it.
Jeffrey, it was a pleasure. Thank you for coming.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you.